Please take your seats. The program will begin soon. Welcome to Politico Playbook First 100 Days Energy. Please welcome Politico's executive producer of events, North America, Annie Allen.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. My team will tell you I've been having anxiety for any of you who have been coming to these breakfasts for the last few weeks. This is our 5th breakfast, and we have a new location today, and I was nervous that we had moved our party and none of you were going to come. So I am so thrilled to have you all here. This, again, is our 5th installment of our Playbook First 100 Days Breakfast series on energy today. I want to thank our sponsor this morning, NRECA, for being our partner. We have a great lineup ahead, and so I'm not going to take too much time. I do want to flag too, if you do not already, if you're interested in energy policy and you do not already subscribe to our 2 newsletters, Morning Energy and Power Switch, this is a great opportunity to do so. You can do it real quick even while I'm transitioning off the stage. But first up is my colleague, our Congress reporter for E&E News, Kelsey Brugger, and she's going to be joined by Representative Bob Latta, the chair of the House Subcommittee on Energy. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you.
All right, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us so early. How are you, Congressman? Congressman Bob Latta of Ohio, thanks so much for having us. We'll just dive right in. I want to ask you about Elon Musk. We've heard a lot in the news about his government efficiency efforts. And one thing I guess I want to ask you about is, you're on the Energy and Commerce Committee, have a lot of oversight over the Department of Energy. And, we've heard from some sources about the folks who are looking to take the buyout really have kind of the most institutional knowledge, it seems, or there's kind of a lot of talk about some of the people with a lot of expertise are looking to take that buyout. And so, as you're thinking about this, are there concerns about, some of the folks with just the most knowledge of the agency, not being there and not being able to carry out the president's mission, on energy? How are you thinking about this?
Well, that's a good question. But, one of the things I've always said, I've been fortunate I think my 15th year I've been on the committee. Mm-hmm. And when you sit up on the dais of Energy and Commerce, the one thing I've always said is this, because I've been very fortunate. I've chaired the Communications Subcommittee.
You've chaired all the...
And I've also chaired what they now call the Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade. Mm-hmm. We call it Digital Commerce and Consumer Protection. So I've been very, very fortunate. But one of the great things about serving on the committee is when you sit up there and you're on that dais, you're talking to people down who are across the country, the entrepreneurs and innovators, that we don't want to put the wrong laws and then the regulations that would follow that would hamper them to be able to develop what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And one of the great things also about being on the committee is going out across this country and seeing what's happening and what these entrepreneurs have done. It's just, for instance, I can remember back in the 1970s, and I don't want to date myself, but we were told in this country we had no energy. We were told we had no oil, we had no natural gas, and today, because of these entrepreneurs and these innovators out there, we lead the world now in natural gas production. Mm-hmm. And our allies across the globe are all saying the same thing. They want our LNG exports. Mm-hmm. And they also look at what we've done on the oil side, being able to outproduce Saudi Arabia or Russia on any given day on oil production. So to me, it's always making sure we get the right rules out there, the right laws first, to make sure that these people can do these great things that we've seen accomplished in this country. Because the other thing is I always worry about is Ohio in the country. My district has 86,000 manufacturing jobs, and I tell people this: it's not that I need energy; I've got to have affordable energy. If I don't have affordable energy, we can't compete. Mm-hmm. So it's making sure we have all these things working in the right direction. In Ohio, 83% of everything that comes in is trucked. And then the other thing that's happening across the country is when you think about the data centers coming online.
Right.
And one question I asked in the last Congress to everybody that came before us was a very simple question. Do we have to have more energy or less energy being produced in this country? And everybody, I don't care where they're from, said the exact same thing. We're going to have more energy.
Yeah. Well, some of the cheapest energy by the end of the decade is renewables, right? So as we talk about and as we look at you know, with what House Republicans are doing and what Senate Republicans are doing on reconciliation, you know, a lot of that is looking at targeting the incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act, right? What are your colleagues, what are you hearing from colleagues about the IRA, about the tax subsidies? You know, we've seen some folks say they want to protect certain credits. Do you expect them to draw red lines? I mean, obviously we also have other things at play here. We have SALT, we have Medicaid. So what are you hearing from your colleagues?
Well, that's a great question too. And you know, we go back to 2008 when the Republicans, we came up, we called it an all of the above energy strategy, and that meant everything. But the one thing that was also included in that statement was one thing: the federal government was not going to pick the winners and losers. And so when you look at right now, what I've heard from my colleagues, and also starting with the speaker said we shouldn't be taking a sledgehammer to it, we should take a scalpel and really see what's been working out there to make sure that we can get that done then. So as we go forward, I think you're going to see a scalpel approach, not a sledgehammer approach, as we especially when we look on.
Do you think that this is a hill that some people are going to die on, though, because there's competing priorities, right? Like, do you think this is something that people will dig in on? What would you like to keep?
Well, and again, I've talked to a lot of people across my district because, again, that's the other great thing. You know, we just had a work period, and I was on the road the entire time, and you actually see some of the innovations that are coming up that these companies have come up with. And so I look at all these things. I also know this, is that one of our large power companies in the state of Ohio, and when you think about like Intel coming online and the substations and everything else that are having to be built, and the massive amount of grid, and that's the other problem we have out there, is that grid modernization that we have to be doing, and I've worked on that, and we've worked across the aisle. But when I see what we were doing out there, especially with that one power company, they're not looking at winners and losers, you might say, and but power going to that grid. They've got to have as much power going in that grid as possible. And so that's their big concern, is where do we get this power from and how are we going to get it? And so, you know, I think that times have been changing over the last 5 years, especially on members in the committee looking at things. But we're also looking at, on the nuclear side now, especially small modulars, and I'm a big proponent. And really looking into seeing where we're going to get that, you know, the energy from. And spent nuclear rods, with the French have been recycling, are leading the world in that, and we should be looking at that too, because we stopped that whole process back about 1977 during the Carter administration.
That kind of reminds me of thinking of the Department of Energy staffing issues, though. I mean, is that something that you think could be a concern if there's an effort to really shrink the workforce of the federal government? I mean, like, how are you thinking about
Well, you know,
this?
it's like anything else out there with the federal government. You want to make sure that you're not hindering. And I think in some cases, you know, you have, you know, we had an example with the EPA was testifying before us. And this is when President Biden, you know, was talking about what are we going to do about the energy for these cars and how much we're going to have. And I asked a very simple question, an EPA witness that we had a couple of years ago, how much more energy we're going to have to produce in this country, and they came up with a figure of 4.5%, which was crazy because we're being told over 50%, if not even higher, to make sure if you're going to go all electric. So, you know, again, I think that when you look at the departments, they have to come up with, because I always look at it this way. If a department comes up with a figure, then that's what everybody's going to have to try to work from. But if it's not feasible, how are you ever going to get there? So I think that's one of the things that really has to be questions in the departments, is that, you know, whatever they're doing has got to be looking at reality and not what they would like, you know, what they would like, but what's the reality of the situation. And you look at Americans and our driving habits, and you look at the fleet. The age of our fleet right now has gone up to about 12 years now. So it's never going to happen, but it would put a terrible strain on our economy.
I want to ask you about permitting, because part of the issue here also is permitting. I mean, I guess that's also a workforce question, right? Like at Interior or at the Department of Energy, are there any issues of, you know, moving these permits through the system if there aren't enough people in place to do that? Is that, or maybe that's not?
Well, when we think about permitting in committee, we got to do something. And and even, you know, across the aisle, there's a concern that it's taking too long. if you look at, these projects that they want to bring online, you look at Communist China when they're talking about bringing on another 100 coal-fired power stations in the near future. And PJM has shown that what they're doing, of course, the RTO, that we're taking off generation at the same time that our power needs are going up. So when we think about permitting, it's like we want to make sure the environment is protected. I've never had anybody ever say in committee that they're against regulations. Across our everything that we regulate in committee, we say that they all say the same thing. Just give us regulations we can live with. But on the permitting side, it's taking so long that by the time a permit might be approved, and all of a sudden, just at that last second, somebody else files another lawsuit. So permitting is something I know that not just the Energy and Commerce Committee, but Natural Resources is looking at. And so it's going to be something that we're going to be working with together because, again, we have to make sure things are done right, but you just can't keep things from never happening. And we know right now, if we need more power across this country, how are you going to get it from point A to point B?
Do you have those talks started? Like, have you started chatting with folks about because there was those bipartisan permitting talks that really kind of picked up, and there was sort of like a rush of meetings at the end of last year, sort of a last-ditch effort. Have those restarted? Have you been talking to people?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Because again, it's hard to believe we're almost 1/6 through this year already, which is like it's like it'll be March, and then April will be gone. But no, the talks have begun. That what we need to get done on permitting, and again, it's going to have to get everybody at the table to get it done. But I believe we can do it, and we can get it done. But it's not that it can get it done; it has to get done because, again, if we put off for another Congress not getting permitting done, then we're going to be so much farther behind, and we can't keep falling behind in the rest of the world. But because again, when we talk about the data centers, they're coming online. If we want to be at the top of the world on these things, the number one issue is going to be on the power side, and that power has to get, like I said, from point A to point B. And permitting is going to be a huge part of making sure that gets done.
Do you think, so like the broad contours of a deal last year kind of were about some changes on the natural resources side, National Environmental Policy Act, maybe there are some other environmental laws, kind of speeding things up, maybe looking at, tightening judicial review periods, kind of in exchange for maybe amending the Federal Power Act, making it easier to build, power lines across state lines. But like historically, Republicans have had some concern about, eminent domain concerns, cost allocation concerns of building out transmission lines. Do you, and if I'm thinking back to the debt ceiling negotiations, right? Like, if we kind of simplify this and Democrats wanted permitting, like they basically didn't get it, right? They got like a government study that some thought was counterproductive, and there were some like modest changes to NEPA. Do you think, and my understanding was at the time, Energy and Commerce members said, we don't want to do transmission. Like there were issues with it. Some people said there's not really enough education. So has that changed? Has there been, because of this pressure from the tech industry and Republicans have an interest in leading on AI, and maybe you've had some like center-right groups kind of come in and do, briefings and such. Has that changed, I guess, or where are ENC Republicans?
Just in the last couple of years, just looking at the past, where our generation needs or our electric needs were, and where we're going to be in the next few years, it's just gone off the charts. And people were thinking about maybe 5-6 years ago, and maybe we're stuck in that time frame, not looking over that horizon. But that horizon is here today. And when you look, again, at the power generation needs we're going to have, if we're going to get it, again, it's going to have to be through a permitting. And I think that's going to speeding things up because everybody's realizing that I gave everybody on the committee earlier this year just some forecasts where we're looking at on generation and where it was just a couple of years ago, and those bar graphs are going straight up. So I think that's really making people decide that we got to get this thing done because we just can't wait and get, as I said, you just can't put this off because you're going to fall way behind the rest of the world, and the United States has got to lead, not follow.
Do you, And there's new members, a lot of new members on ENC.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah. So, what do kind of some of these discussions look like at this point? Like, is there a fair amount of like education piece here, or what kinds of things are you planning to do in subcommittee?
Well, overall in the committee, we have 10 new members on the Republican side alone. I think it's 5 on the Democrat side. And so when you look at the numbers, it's just like, we've never seen turnover like this before. And so but several of the new members coming on the committee have got great backgrounds in different areas where they have expertise, and that's really great. And so, we can help with that information that they're going to bring to the committee. But it's just like everything else. With energy and commerce, you got to show up. And it's just not like waiting till your time's, you're going to ask questions in a committee and run down there for 5 minutes and leave. It's studying. It's like being back in school. So last night, I was going through everything, and that's the last thing I do at night. You have to read this and get ready, because again, the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I don't want to offend anybody on any other committee, but it is the greatest committee in Congress. We have the broadest jurisdiction.
Well, so big.
And it's a large committee, but we cover everything. And so every 15, 20 minutes during the day, my life changes. You never are doing the exact same thing. But on committee, that's the same thing for the new committee members. We have several freshmen. That usually has never happened to have that many freshmen come on the committee. But when you have freshmen coming on or other people coming on from different committees, it's like it's a new experience, because ENC, we cover everything out there, and you've got to be prepared and be ready to go every time we have a hearing.
Mm-hmm. What is the committee's role looking like as reconciliation picks up? Like what on the energy side? Because I know there's the healthcare piece too, but on the energy side, like, what kinds of things would you like to see?
Well, on our side, for different committee hearings coming up, well, we had our first subcommittee hearing, and it's pretty much just laying the groundwork. We got to have more power. And so I think you're going to see, I know that Chairman Guthrie is going to we're going to be having another full committee hearing where you're just talking about just the AI data centers, everything that's going to be coming from them. So I think but everybody I think has to realize is that we're in a situation that we haven't seen in years, that the amount of power that we're going to have. And again, it's not picking the winners and losers, and it's base load is going to be tremendous. And we've had, the United States has led the world in when you look at emission reductions from like 2005 to 2020. But we can, this is the great things about this country we can do. But if you want carbon-free emissions, it's nuclear. But we also have to have all the other traditionals, and we have to look at the intermittents at the same time. But when you're thinking about these data centers and what they require, the amount of power, and when you're looking at this year alone, we're talking about before the end of the year, 4.5 to 6 to up to 8% more power usage, and then that's just going to keep going up exponentially for the next several years. All this is going to require one thing, as I keep saying, it's just power. And so I think that when I look at the subcommittee, we're going to be looking at, first of all, we have to have the generation. And then the next question is, what about the grid? What about the grid modernization, the cybersecurity issues that all revolve around it? So, the supply chain, it's just one thing that leads to the other, because even if you have the power, as I said, you've got to be able to move it. And so how are you going to get there?
Republicans have talked about all of the above has been this sort of catchphrase for a long time. We've, of course, seen President Trump has kind of like, personal beef with wind power. Does that sort of undermine congressional Republicans' talking points on all of the above?
I think I go back to Ohio. When I see what a large company is doing there, one of our power companies, trying to get as much power into that grid as possible, and it's so important if you're thinking about what we're going to be able to do with the data centers coming online, that depending where you are in the country, and again, it's not picking the winners and losers, it's what's working, but it's also what's going to get that power into that grid. And that's what these companies are all doing right now. It's just like how much power we can get in that grid to be able to secure that need that they're going to have, not just this year, but in the years to come.
So you don't necessarily take President Trump all that seriously when he...
I think that on committee, that as we look at the issues out there, that we realize that there's a massive need for power, and how's it going to come? On the intermittent side, the question about battery storage, that's an issue that we just don't have a lot of, I've talked to some of the large energy producers that have intermittents, and they don't have too many hours of storage. So you always have to have a parallel source running along with it, because I was talking to somebody recently, some of the gas-fired plants that were out there just for when they needed hit different times when they need to have that base load coming online, are almost running full bore right now, because it's continuous. Because again, it's just that need is there, and it's great because again, when I think about 86,000 manufacturing jobs, it's important, but it's also important that we keep things running and keep things up, because in 2014 we had a massive polar vortex that went across the Midwest, and at that time in Ohio we didn't have a blackout or brownout. I had steel plants, float glass in my district at the time, but we had not one. But in talking with PJM through the years, could we sustain that? And at the same time, we were taking off generation. And, until last year, everything was the same until they say, getting into 2026, 27, then we have an issue. And so you go to the PJM's website, again, as I mentioned, it just shows that that the generation's going down at the same time the need's going up.
Supply is going up. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We're out of time, but yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Please welcome Politico's Executive Vice President and General Manager of Media Business, Callie Baute, and the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association's Chief Executive Officer, Jim Matheson.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us here today. I'm Callie Baute, Executive Vice President and General Manager at Politico, and I'd like to thank our sponsor, the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, NRECA, for their support of today's programming. As we just heard a moment ago, America is at an energy crossroads. We just heard a lot about the power demands placed upon the grid, and the reliability of our electric grid hangs in the balance. NRECA's CEO, Jim Matheson, is with me to talk about energy policies that could address these challenges. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So NRECA represents more than 900 private, not-for-profit, consumer-owned electric co-ops which provide electricity services to 42 million people in 47 states. And Jim's own list of accomplishments is quite long, but notably he also served as a U.S. representative for Utah for 7 terms. So we're thrilled to have him here for this conversation. Jim, let's dive in. NRECA represents electric co-ops that are specifically focused on rural regions. Can you quickly explain how these co-ops differ from municipal or private electricity providers and how they help meet the needs of rural communities?
Sure. I think the key difference is the cooperative model. These utilities are owned by the consumers that they serve. They're governed by those consumers. All the consumers vote on who the board of directors should be. And so every decision that's made is made through the eyes of that consumer. Any economic decision goes straight to the consumer bill. There are no shareholders. It's all a community focus. And so I think that is, for a monopoly function like electricity, I think it works really well. It's a really positive situation for our members, and the customer satisfaction ratings that electric cooperatives achieve around the country really validate that.
Demand for electricity is growing, but we're struggling to meet the current needs. How did we get to the point where reliable electricity is now actually in question?
Well, we're in a business, first of all, where these decisions, you can't turn things around like that. These are long-term, capital-intensive decisions you make in the electric sector. And you've got a few factors that's created this challenge right now. One is, technology is driving market change. I mean, there is greater demand for electricity. You heard it from the previous panel. A lot of it, the discussions about artificial intelligence and data centers, but that's not the only reason electric demand is growing. There's a lot more electrification going on in our economy, a lot more onshoring of manufacturing. And that's good. That's good news for America, that we need more electricity. So that's one factor. At the same time, the policy world has created impediments to staying up with that demand. And if actually it's encouraging the shutting down of power plants that still have useful life left, and we're not replacing it with the same type of reliable capacity. And so that's where this is an interesting discussion in Washington in the current situation is we've got this huge growing demand in front of us. There are a lot of factors and challenges to meet it, but what can we do on the policy side to create a better path forward so we can meet this demand as an electric sector?
Let's stick with that for a minute. You just mentioned about power plants, and for context, the EPA announced a new power plant policy that requires existing coal plants to lower emissions or be shut down by 2038. You just expressed some concern about that and about these new rules. Can you explain why?
Look, there's been a lot of regulations that have an impact on discouraging development of new resources, but the power plant rule that you just referenced, that's the big one. And it's not just coal, it's natural gas as well that affects. And we've got utilities right now, members of NRECA, making decisions about making billion-dollar investments in large natural gas combined cycle plants, and they don't know if they're going to be able to run them more than 40% of the time based on this existing rule. This rule needs to be removed. We've sued because we don't think it's legal. We think it violates what the capacity the EPA has based on the Clean Air Act. But we're encouraging the Trump administration also to try to remove this rule because we think it puts us at extreme jeopardy in terms of always available resources for electric generation. And as I said, this is not just coal, this is gas as well. The rule requires use of technologies that aren't commercially viable, haven't been proven, and we think that's why they violated the law. And the sooner we can get that rule off the books, the better, because as I said, we've got people right now moving ahead with decisions, not knowing if they're going to be able to run these plants as they're designed to run, which is more than 40% of the time.
A recent report found that over half of North America is at risk of energy shortfalls within the next 10 years due to the issues that we've been discussing, and particularly the one you just mentioned. So you're not alone in raising alarms here. But why do you think more hasn't been done to address these concerns? Do you believe that policymakers fully understand what's at stake here?
Well, first of all, that report came from the North American Reliability Corporation, a very credible entity that is in charge of, I call them the grid watchdog. And so their reports have meaning and stature. Look, I don't want to say policymakers don't understand it per se, but these are issues where it doesn't happen all at once. These are trends that take place over time, and it's good until it's not. We have had examples where we had, during extreme weather events, shutdowns. We had one here in the mid-Atlantic states where in 9 states we had shutdowns on Christmas Eve 2 years ago based on polar vortex, where there just wasn't a gas left in the pipelines to run power plants because it was so cold and there was a lot of heating use of the natural gas at the time. So this isn't theoretical. We've seen where we've had outages, and the risk continues to grow because demand is growing and supply isn't. And so it comes down to that simple supply-demand relationship, and that's where NERC has been waving the flag about we got to get on top of this because you don't build a power plant in 90 days. This is something that takes a long lead time to do. And so while we haven't had massive outages right now, you can't flip it around quickly to address that once you have the problem. That's why NERC is sounding the alarm.
So you wrote a letter to President Trump outlining how he can help pave the way for more reliable, affordable energy. What steps do you hope to see from the new administration and from Congress to ensure grid reliability?
Well, there's a lot. But first of all, we need to remove these regulations, and the power plant rule being the most important one, that are ill-advised, put the electric utility sector at a disadvantage for meeting this need. That's an action that can take place without congressional action, actually. And that's something we're encouraging, particularly the EPA, to look at those issues. The other area where they can make a lot of progress, and you've heard it in the previous panel discussion, is this issue of it's so hard to build or site anything in this country. And a lot of people have been talking about permitting reform now for a few years. And that's great. Permitting reform is going to be hard to do because there's not one way to look at it. There's not one law. There's National Environmental Policy Act, and there's the Clean Air Act, and there's the Endangered Species Act, and you can go down the list of all these different areas that affect how you permit and site new infrastructure. But we all know it's gotten out of hand. And we all know that what we need to have is something that's predictable with a time-defined limit on how long the process can take, limitations on litigation to delay it afterwards. Something that's predictable, you can get the thumbs up, thumbs down, you build or you don't build, but dragging it out forever doesn't help anybody in this country. The interesting development on permitting reform, though, is used to be it was more of an industry wants it, environmental community doesn't, but now suddenly it's really hard to site a solar plant. And so the environmental community is saying, oh, wait a minute, this permitting reform is an issue. And so I think you're getting a broader consensus in a bipartisan way around permitting reform. But again, I want to make sure to understate how difficult it's going to be to make it happen, because it's not one piece of legislation. It's going to require a series of actions across different environmental laws to right-size our permitting structure in a way to make it more reasonable and more rational.
Jim, when you were in Congress, you had a reputation for working across the aisle.
You don't see much of that these days.
Yeah, it is becoming increasingly difficult, that's for sure. So how do you think that Congress is going to be able to reach bipartisan consensus on energy policy that will be sustainable for the years to come?
Well, look, I think there are a few things where you're seeing opportunity for some consensus. One, I mentioned just on the permitting reform, I think everybody gets it, that we've got to do something more rational and reasonable than what we have today. Secondly, we've got to recognize the need for addressing this challenge, this global challenge right now about who's going to be the world leader in artificial intelligence. Is it going to be the United States? Is it going to be China? And I think that's one that crosses party lines as well. So you've got some opportunities here, I think, for greater consensus. And I hope that's the case. I'm not naive. I understand what's going on Capitol Hill these days. But I do think there are broader issues out there about keeping the lights on at a price people can afford. Man, that isn't a Democratic or Republican issue as far as I'm concerned, nor is my membership, the electric cooperatives across the country. We view that as our North Star, reliable, affordable power for everybody.
Jim, I think that's a great place for us to leave it. I want to thank you so much for your time and your insights today, and thank you again to the NRECA for your partnership on today's program.
Okay,
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We are waiting for our next guest, Congressman Weber, who is, who is on his way down. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit for all of you who have not had a chance to subscribe to Morning Energy or Power Switch. This is your moment. And also, if you are not subscribers for E&E News, which is our partner publication that focuses on energy and environmental news, 5 publications a day, you should also go and subscribe to that as well. So that's my, my tidbit for you, and we will be back in just a minute. Thank you.
We have a timer, I see.
Yeah, oops.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Lefebvre. I'm a reporter over at Politico. I cover energy. I have here Representative Randy Weber from Texas. If you're sadly unfamiliar with his district, it's like a big energy sandwich. He's got refineries in Sweeney. He's got LNG ports in Freeport, I believe. You've got refineries in Beaumont. You've got Galveston, which is the port of entry into the Houston Ship Channel. They've got more pipelines, and Italy has spaghetti. This guy, if you want to talk about energy, he's the one to do. So first thing I want to ask, and I apologize, we're a little bit late, but so what's with this national energy emergency? I mean, we've got record oil output. We've got more LNG than we know what to do with. We've got renewables scaling up pretty quickly. Is there an emergency there?
How much time do we have?
We got 24 minutes, but I'll give you
24 minutes.
I'll give you.
Well, look, let me refine something you said about our district. I'm the upper Gulf Coast of Texas. We have 7 ports. We have more than any of the members of Congress. Our District 14 in Texas produces 65% of the nation's jet fuel, 80% of the nation's military-grade fuel, and 20% of the nation's gasoline east of the Rockies. We do have 3 LNG plants, okay? We are big, big, big on energy. And yes, while it's true that we're producing a lot of oil and stuff right now, we are in an energy crisis if we don't get our grid bolstered up. Winter Storm Uri, February of 21, I live north of Galveston. Right. We start the Louisiana line and go down the Texas Gulf Coast, okay? We're 1/3 of the Texas Gulf Coast. Below me is Michael Cloud, and then below that's Henry Cuellar. Mm-hmm. So we are huge on energy. Our grid needs to be bolstered up, and what that means is dispatchable, dependable, reliable energy, something that we can bring online that quick. In Texas, for those of you who don't know, and this is more than you bargained for, Texas, for those of you who don't know, is the #1 wind energy state in the country. 20% of our grid comes from wind energy. We're #1 in solar panels. 5% of our energy comes from solar panels. But we found out in Winter Storm Uri that the windmills ice up and they don't always perform.
And so do the natural gas wells, correct?
Oh, absolutely. You bet we do. And so we also found out that solar panels get covered up, snow or whatever, and they don't produce. And you're hearing all this talk about AI. We have got to be moving along with energy now because, to answer your question, why are we calling it an energy emergency? Y'all are hearing AI, or you're hearing about companies moving to Texas. To put an energy plant on the ground can take 3, 4, or more years. We're trying to streamline the permitting process to take care of that, just to give you a little bit of an overview there.
For streamlining the energy process, what do you think about all these cuts to staff that DOGE is making? I mean, Interior Department saying they're going to lose like a couple thousand people. How is that going to streamline?
Well, here's what happens. You've got somebody going in there that's looking at what we call a federal bloated government agencies to make sure that we only have the people that we need. And there's about 6 agencies that have to deal with permitting and processes, for example. I won't name them all. DOE, EPA, FERC, you can go right down the list, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And they ought to all run parallel. We shouldn't have to wait for this project to get approved by one of the agencies and then let's move it to the second agency. We've had people come into our office, and I'll do it this way. In your office, in the Cannon building, I know y'all can't vote for me, at least legally, but I vote for y'all every day. I have people come in the Cannon office and say, we would put a facility, whether it's nuclear or something, on the ground. They could build it. It could be a $6 billion, $8 billion, $10 billion. They could build it in 2.5 to 3.5 years. But the permitting process takes 6, 7 years sometimes.
Do you trust DOGE to are they getting rid of the people who are the bloat? Or I mean, it sounds like they're just putting heads on a wall.
Well, no, I would say that they're going through with a fine-tooth comb and they're saying, look, this agency ought to run leaner and meaner. And there's no reason, as I said earlier, it takes 6, 7 years to get a permit done. There's just no reason.
Now, you're part of the Energy Committee. Do you know what committee oversees DOGE?
Really, I don't.
Are you planning to bring them in for any kind of oversight hearing, like to make sure they're doing it right?
Well, I think you have the president to do that. Some people say that that Elon Musk is an unelected president, but here's the fact: the president, every president in American history, has the right to have his or her own advisors, right? So people are griping about that, but look, the president has got his own advisors. I know when George W. Bush, who was from, Texas governor, when he had advisors, one of them was Laura Bush, his wife. Yeah. And so, they have the right type of advisors.
Right. So let's say 2028 comes along, we see a big swing in the electorate. We get President AOC decides to hire Mark Cuban to go through the government and say, look for anything that might, at first they declare a climate emergency, and they say, look for anything that might tie the US to stranded fossil fuel assets or something, which was the environmentalists kept bringing. Do you think that DOGE gives them a pathway to do that?
There's an old saying, to the victor goes the spoils. So, you know, if the Democrats get in power, that's what they choose to do. That's what they choose to do.
Okay. I talked to an oil lobbyist during the first Trump administration who mentioned that he had a drink. And he
had
said
a what?
he had a drink before when he was saying this. But he said the Trump administration, he liked the Trump
They didn't
administration's
offer me a
energy.
drink when I came in, just so you know.
We can reorder? No, when they were very in favor of President Trump's energy policy, but he said that Trump's trade policy is the dagger in the heart of his energy policy. What would you say to that?
I don't think so, because we've watched President Trump. He will threaten countries, and we've seen this movie before. And you watched a lot of those countries turn around and get in line with. There's no reason why their trade policy should impose over our trade policies, because they're taking advantage of the American economic system. And President
Canada's
Trump's
doing that, or?
Well, not just them, but more of them. You saw Canada and Mexico, where President Trump was talking about tariffs, and what they do? Well, they started singing a different tune. So listen, he's watching that. I think you're going to see him, and that also goes. I know this is energy, but that also goes for NATO overseas and the European Union. So he's doing that on multiple fronts.
So Trump last night, I think, said he wanted to support Keystone XL, the big pipeline project out of Canada. If you were going to talk to the company that's behind Keystone XL, what would you tell them about, yeah, we want you to do it, but we're going to put a 25% tariff on your oil, and there might be tariffs on your steel as well?
Well, I'm gonna back up in front of that. The Keystone Pipeline would have come into my districts, 830,000 barrels of oil a day. Of course, you know, it came from Canada, went through Cushing, Oklahoma, down into Port Arthur, Texas. They're on the Gulf Coast. Let me put that in perspective. When you're moving that kind of product, 830,000 barrels of product a day, and yes, we have a lot of energy, but we can produce more. We can sell it to countries overseas. We can continue to make money. People say, well, we have an energy glut. No, we don't. We ought to be making as much as we can. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, I didn't mention this earlier, 60% of the SPR is in my district, District 14. And we have, President Biden almost depleted the SPR. We ought to be filling that back up. Now look, when you take 830,000 barrels of product a day, and people say, we don't like pipelines. They're dangerous, they blow up, blah, 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 blah. Well, you want to talk about how many 18-wheelers it takes to move 830,000 barrels of oil a day? It takes about 5,300. Who wants 5,300 18-wheelers, diesel trucks, tankers on the highway every day? Get the Keystone Pipeline in place. Now, whether or not he wants to charge, the president wants to charge tariffs to Canada, that's something that can be negotiated deal by deal.
Exempt him from tariffs?
Well, I mean, I've never been in the tariff business, but I'm sure the president has the authority to do it the way he likes.
Yeah, but then you're getting into, the oil industry's long-time slogan is, we want stability. And so in that case, I think you'd be asking him, well, you might get a waiver from tariffs or you might not.
Well, I think that commitment would be made up front before they ever agreed to the project. I want to go back to something earlier than that, when President Obama was in office, 2008, 2012. Some of y'all may know I was in the Texas House of Representatives before I got demoted to Congress. But we watched energy way back then. And here's the thing, I thought President Obama, I talked to him, I met him. To his credit, he came to the Republican conference and spoke to us. And I talked to him specifically, his second term, I got elected in 2012. And I talked to him specifically, Mr. President, we'd like to see that project approved, that pipeline permit approved. He said they were working on it. But then, of course, he denied it. And then President Trump comes in and he reinstates it. Maybe we ought to have a law that says if a president says this permit is approved, because did I mention some of these projects take 4, 5, 6, 7 years or more, then the succeeding presidents can't revoke that permit.
Would that go with taking offshore acres off the table for oil leases?
That's exactly right. And here's the thing, federal offshore permits, drilling permits offshore, right, federal, and permits on land, federal permits offshore and on land, if you combine them all together, what Biden put a pause on, Obama did too in some respect, if you put all those together in 2019, I think was a year, together the on-land federal permits and offshore produced enough oil and gas energy that if it was a country, it'd be the 9th largest country in the world. That's how much energy is on federal lands and federal leases offshore.
Getting back to international relations and energy, I mean, we saw President Trump in this latest term, his first kind of international action was with the Colombian president. They were saying we're going to put tariffs on Colombia.
You say his latest term, you mean this term?
time. I'm sorry, yes, correct. And then the Colombian president went and canceled a joint venture between Occidental Petroleum, which I'm not sure if they're in Houston, but I don't think it's in your district, and the state-run oil company in Colombia. I mean, are you hearing from companies saying this back and forth, this kind of upheaval in international relations is hurting our business? Is that something they're bringing to you?
We're not hearing that, but I would postulate this thought process about that. When the president goes in there and he starts flexing American muscles, because that's what it is. The United States is the largest, strongest country in the world, and best in my opinion. When he starts making moves to get other countries to fall in line, some of y'all will remember, you might not, how many of y'all remember the name E.F. Hutton? TV commercials, here's one right here. E.F. Hutton, when they speak, people listen. When President Trump speaks, people listen, and so do the leaders of those countries.
Well, the Canadian energy minister was in town a few weeks ago. The defense minister was in town. The trade minister was in town. They're talking about the need to de-risk from the United States. I mean, that's the message they're getting from President Trump.
Oh, there's a lot of it going back and forth. You know, when he makes them our 51st state, that won't be a problem.
Well, we'll see. How many senators do they get?
How many senators they get?
Yeah.
I guess they get 2 like everybody else.
The other thing I was going to ask, we saw DOGE withholding payments for contracts that Congress already approved in the previous Congress. Is there any worries that Congress proposes, DOGE disposes? I mean, are you guys still worried that anything you approve in a reconciliation package is going to be only the first draft?
Well, that's a catchy phrase, but it's only just a phase, so we got to do away with it so we can get on with it. Did y'all see what I did there? So look, they're going to examine every contract piece by piece. So we really can't say, well, blanket statement, no, y'all can't do that, or you shouldn't have done that, or you shouldn't have done this. We will see what they do with reconciliation. That remains to be seen. We're going to start having some votes pretty quick here.
Yeah, but I mean, like if DOGE comes in and says, well, Congress approved X number of money for, developing data centers, we want to be the ones to put out those contracts. We want to make sure that the counterparty is safe.
I don't think they're going to have that kind of authority.
Okay.
They're going to depend on Congress to move forward with this reconciliation.
Okay. And when it comes to data centers, I mean, are you thinking, it's going to be a big deal for Texas, electricity demand? Do you think the market's a little bit frothy right now? I know all the talk is about we're going to need more for AI, but we're also seeing, I think it was Microsoft saying they were going to cancel a bunch of leases for data centers because they were a little bit worried. I mean, what's your forecast on how much this is going to actually become a big thing?
I just instructed y'all's staff, because I know y'all can't vote for me, but we still work for y'all every day. I just instructed our staff yesterday. I said, look, I don't know about all these data centers coming in. I don't know how many there are. I don't know what the power requirements are. Of course, depends on what map you use. There's 6 to 9 grids across the United States of America. As y'all know, Texas has most of Texas is in ERCOT, Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which when I was in the Texas legislature, I was on the Environmental Red Committee, and we had purview over the ERCOT and PUC, Public Utility Commission. So I think what's going to happen is at some point we've got to decide how much power is needed for these data centers, number one, and number two, it has to be incumbent upon the company that's coming in to make sure that they can get the energy they need. And if they can't, then we don't want them crashing those different grids, and we've got to decide that up front. We've got to get in business progress and get some more energy in this country.
Is there any talk about integrating the Texas electric grid with the other states?
Do we have any Texans in the room? We've got 4 or 5 of them that will admit it.
I lived there for 6 years.
You lived there for 6 years. In Texas, we have a bumper sticker and a slogan, and it says, "Don't mess with Texas." Some of y'all have seen that, right? And so, we're not wanting to get our grid tied in with the federal grid.
Okay. Are you doing any town halls recently, or have you done any?
No, we've been so busy, I've not done town halls.
Okay. I know one of your neighbors, Pete Sessions, got an earful at a town hall.
It does happen.
I mean, are you hearing from constituents at all worried about, like,
Let me give a lighthearted anecdote to what happened to me in one of the last town halls we did. I had a guy way in the back stand up when he was heckling me. He said, Weber, if you were St. Peter, I wouldn't vote for you. I just looked at him, I said, buddy, if I was St. Peter, you wouldn't be in my district. Some of y'all will get that later.
You know, the Dallas, the Fed board in Dallas said if the tariffs do go through with Canada and Mexico, it would erase about up to 30% of GDP growth in Texas. I think they said something like Texas is like in the middle of the highway for any tariff fight. Are you communicating with the White House at all about what this could do for that area?
Well, we're not. We have some of our colleagues are. Texas, our number one trading partner is Mexico, and our number two is Canada. And so there was a lot of talk about when Rick Perry was in office, of doing a highway right up from Brownsville all the way up through Texas. Of course, we couldn't make a law that said what it would do from then on, but it was to do with just exactly that, move trade. How that's going to affect that trade, I don't know, but I do know this. Texas' number one trading partner is Mexico. Texas' number two is Canada. So what happens will have an impact on us. I will give Governor Abbott a shout out. He's on top of this stuff. I've dealt with Governor Abbott on many, many occasions. If it was going to be a problem for Texas, I think he would have been either singing out loud or he would have gone to talk to the president directly.
Okay, but you haven't, you haven't talked to the White House about what it would do to your state?
No, and I don't feel the need unless. And Governor Abbott came and met with the Texas Republicans delegation on Capitol Hill. Was it week before last? I've been out of the country for a week, so a week before last. So,
what were you doing?
Israel. We went to Israel.
Oh, okay. And then recently, the Energy Department's Energy National Labs said they felt the impact of funding freeze, tens of millions of dollars. You wrote a letter, right? And you asked. A lot of other colleagues seem to be fine with that, but I mean, what was your thinking of stepping up for the national labs?
Well, there are 17 national labs in the United States. Of course, I'm on Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and so we want to make sure that that kind of funding is in place because that is our prosperity going forward. And I don't know how many of y'all have been to any of the national labs, but they do a really good job, and they're really, really necessary. And on Science, Space, and Technology Committee, for example, we deal with them a lot. We have that purview. And so we pay close attention to it, and we want to keep that kind of innovation coming.
Now, we have the president saying at one time he wants higher oil production, and he wants to slash fuel energy prices by half. I mean, that sounds good for, I guess, us, but for the companies in your district, what do they think about that?
Well, I haven't had much input, quite frankly. I think what they're going to do is they're going to watch and see exactly how long it takes and what that means to their bottom line, how much energy production they can ramp up, because there's an economy of savings, and the more energy you produce, the cheaper you can produce it. We'll see.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate taking the time out.
But thank y'all.
Good morning. My name is Matt Daly. I'm the editor for Politico Pro's Energy Service, and I'm joined here today by Senator Lefebvre. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. Glad to be here.
Not that you've got much going on up the hill here, but we'll take a little bit of your time and we'll get you back to work here. So, first of all, I wanted to ask you, the big story going around Washington, of course, is the Elon Musk DOGE actions. The federal workforce is pretty traumatized right now by every count that we're hearing. What's your take on how this activity is affecting the federal government?
From an energy perspective, of just personal energy? No, I'm
well,
just
we
kidding.
can go broad and then come back to energy if you want to bring it.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. You know, when I first got into politics, I had a bunch of restaurants in Denver. I was frustrated by the city council and the mayor making decisions to get reelected. So I ran for mayor on this small business platform of we could make government smaller and more efficient without traumatizing it. And so I didn't really want to win in the beginning, but I ended up mayor of Denver in 2003, and we went about trying to find every way we could to make the city government smaller and to do more for the people. We didn't have layoffs. This was after the dot-com bubble had burst, so that our sales tax was way down. So we just did a hiring freeze for a couple of years and re-examined each agency. We spent a huge amount of time maintaining morale, just going, me, the mayor, you know, senior staff going into the different parts of the city government and making sure as people dealt with, you know, for about a year we had every other Friday you'd get off at noon, but it would be unpaid, which if you're having trouble making your monthly rent at the end of the month, that's not good. But we told people how important it was their work. And we were able to, you know, over my 8 years as mayor, we didn't make it smaller, but we dramatically restrained the growth of the city government, and we did all these new programs. I think that's what people want. They want us, we all knew the government should be smaller. Just like any business, if it's unrestrained, bureaucracy will naturally grow. That's a natural tendency. But coming in and I think just helter-skelter using an axe on people's lives is traumatic for everyone. Even the people that haven't been dismissed feel the pain and the trauma around there, and it doesn't appear that there's enough effort going in trying to make sure that people understand that civil service is an honor. I mean, we spent a lot of time making sure people understood that they were delivering something that people needed.
That appears to really, I mean, the traumatization appears to be not a bug, but a feature of this operation. The head of the OMB has said, you know, that was really a goal, to make it unpleasant for this work.
Right, yeah, well, I understand that. They want chaos, and they want that you know, flooding the zone. They want so much going on so fast, and a lot of that, some form of emotional chaos, terror almost. And again, there's two different ways of doing things, and that wouldn't be the one that I've seen to be most effective. I think it's better to work within that bureaucracy and get everybody on the same page saying money matters. You know, I was raised by a single mom who was grew up in the Depression. She never bought a dress. She sewed everything. She'd wash tin foil and saran wrap and tape it to the refrigerator door. That frugality is the absence of that frugality is what pisses people off in terms of their relationship with government. They think that it's being wasted, and that drives anybody nuts, and rightfully so.
When you look across what the longer-term effects are in your own state, which has a lot of federal land and federal operations, is there anything there that are you seeing any effects now from what's happened here in Washington, or are there aspects that you're worried about may be affected?
Oh, no, this is, you know, my mother, again, she was widowed twice before she turned 40, and I was the youngest of 4 kids, and as often happens, kids will have different versions of what happened. At a certain point, she'd say, all right, no nonsense, and get just what we've actually experienced, what we saw from each of us, no nonsense. And I think that's where we are in Colorado and around the country. It's no nonsense. They laid off a bunch of people, scientists in Fort Collins, the CDC did, that were working on vector-driven diseases, so think Lyme disease, and making real progress. And all of a sudden, it's shut down, it's stopped, they're gone. Will they get hired back? There's talk, I mean, who knows? But those interruptions of the hard work of scientific, exploration is really what they're doing. They're trying to find a solution for a disease that's been, hurting people for years. We have a large federal government component of the IRS in Colorado, and hundreds of people lost their jobs. That affects everyone around them. You wonder how we're going to collect all the rent owed to the United States, all of our tax revenues. I can go down the list one after another of places where we have examples in Colorado of places where government is now not delivering. I mean, service to veterans. So many of the layoffs are the last people hired are the first to get laid off. Well, there's been an emphasis for 7 or 8 years to hire veterans. When they come out, the people that risk their lives defending our country, shouldn't they get the first federal jobs? Well, suddenly we're laying off, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of veterans. I don't think what Americans want.
In your committee's purview, you've got the Energy Department, which is now run by your friend, Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary, who you introduced to his confirmation hearing. Are you concerned about what the DOGE cuts might do at the Energy Department? We saw a little bit of a stutter step with a pretty big area of the Energy Department.
Nuclear safety?
That's one, yeah.
Yeah, you really, when you're going to do mass layoffs, you're going to be better served to have more time. And that was not Chris Wright's fault. That happened very rapidly, even as he was, I think, before and as he was being confirmed. But you don't want to, I mean, when you have massive layoffs, you want to make sure you're not laying off the people that are doing the essential work. You know, I flew back from Denver to DC last Tuesday, a week ago, and was on the plane with a guy who'd worked for the Department of Agriculture for 34 years. And he was the one who told me that he just laid off 21 people, and 4 or 5 of them were working in the Ames laboratory in Ames, Iowa, on avian flu. And they're the ones who are doing all the assessments and looking at all the different strains, and is it getting into cattle, is it getting into people? I mean, that is real time, has the potential to be a real pandemic. And suddenly we stopped all our work on it. I mean, that stuff is frustrating at every level, but those critical things like avian flu, nuclear safety, when we laid off all those people that were in charge of our nuclear safety program, I mean, no nonsense, that's a problem.
Absolutely. When you look at the way that shifting over more to the Hill activity now, the Republicans are engaged in setting their budget priorities now, and then they'll be moving on to reconciliation, the big beautiful bill, or perhaps two. We'll see what the day brings us. But this was a real landmark achievement for Democrats under Joe Biden. The Inflation Reduction Act and elements of the bipartisan infrastructure law as well. What can Democrats do to influence or to hold back on Republican efforts to undermine that spending?
Well, I think to a certain extent, as we get more transparency and make people all across the country understanding what those cuts are going to mean to them, it's a little known fact, or it's known, but it's not widely recognized, that 65 or 70% of the Inflation Reduction Act investments in renewable energies and tax incentives happen in red states. This freezing of wind permits, onshore and offshore, most of those wind permits are onshore are in rural counties all across America. For farmers and for the county governments, those revenues are like a miracle. In many cases, especially where water's been an issue and the agriculture is not doing as well as it used to, we have parts of Colorado like that, the revenues from wind energy are a godsend. Well, I mean, the notion that we're in an emergency, that we are now in an energy emergency and we've got to do all these, cut back everything and stop doing this and that. I mean, the last 2 years we have produced global records of oil and gas. I mean, we are the largest oil and gas producer in the history of the world. And if you look at all of our energy, we're not as large as China, but we're only 1/3 the population. Right. So on a scale, we are by far the largest producer of energy in the history of the world on a per capita level. Those things, freezing so much of the Inflation Reduction Act, it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face, is what the old saying was, that you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And really, I think in many of these red counties, as people find out what that's going to mean to their county, their neighbors, they're going to push back and say, hey, wait, let's rethink this. These investments actually benefit us.
And we were seeing some footage from a lot of members were home over the weekend. They had town halls. Voters seem to be a little distressed about the DOGE cuts that are going on and some of the things that are happening in Washington right now. A lot of these investments, be it manufacturing or be it clean energy installations themselves, maybe a little bit below the radar. Even former President Biden has said maybe they didn't do as good a job as publicizing this rollout as they could have. Do you think that those investments are going to, people are going to start to see them or notice when they're gone? Will there be a groundswell to support those and to get back to those Republican members about that impact?
I think there's going to be a groundswell that's going to connect many of these cuts. And I think the energy-related ones are going to be a big part of that, especially in rural areas, but really all across the country. But it's going to be coupled with the cuts in in veterans programs, in housing, in the nutrition, the food nutrition, and the SNAP programs. You look, I mean, if these cuts continue and suddenly farmers aren't going to be able to get crop insurance, right, for their crops, that's going to cripple small farmers way more than the big guys. It's going to cripple them and make them vulnerable to one bad year and they're out of business and they lose their farm. And I guarantee you that will get connected to all these other cuts, and there will be a lot of people showing up at their Republican House member saying, how can you support this? Why are we going along with this? Let's get realistic. Let's cut the nonsense and look at, what do we really want to cut? What are our real benefits? And what are the things that are, that make a good story in the newspaper but aren't really helping each individual community? These people are going to protest and they're going to say, my community.
As the dynamics have changed in the new Congress, you've really tried to carve out a role as a moderate deal maker, much like your friend Joe Manchin did in the previous Senate. Where are some areas that you think you and your Republican colleagues can find agreement and get legislation moving?
Sure, and when I first got into politics back in 22 years ago, as a mayor and then as a governor, what attracted me was the opportunity to get stuff done, to not get so involved in the politics and really look at what's the compromise, what's the alignment of self-interest so that we can get to the compromise and move forward and improve things for our common future. And Joe Manchin was, I think, very successful at hearing both sides. And I try to be more of a listener than a talker. I've never persuaded anybody to change their mind about something that mattered to them by telling them why I'm right or why they're wrong. Really, some of the lessons you learn in the restaurant business is when someone's really upset, you repeat back to them their same words. Some people have told me that's like marital therapy. But you say, yo, that soup was dropped right on your lap. And it was very hot. I mean, repeating back people's words, listening to them, making them feel heard is a very real way to go and find common ground, Republicans and Democrats. And in answer to your question, I think permitting reform, I think we right now recognize we don't have the grid to move electricity from where we can make it to where we need it. And it's going to take time. The notion that we're going to have to spend 7 to 11 years every time we want to build a transmission line, that's too long. And whether you're an environmentalist or whether you're from a large utility or whether you're from the energy industry, any part of it, all of us have an alignment of self-interest to accelerate that and make sure, again, we are the most environmentally sensitive, or one of the most environmentally sensitive countries on Earth. And our standards for both the extraction of minerals but also the processing minerals are going to be the cleanest and set national or international standards. So whether it's building out the grid or finding ways to look at some of the critical minerals, again, if you really want to address climate change, we need to get those minerals, and it's not just the rare earth minerals like lithium, but it's things like copper and nickel. We're going to have to look at mines all over the world, and we're going to have to recognize that we're going to have to raise the standards by which those minerals are extracted and processed, try to do more of that in this country or with our allies, and making sure that we maintain those relationships with our allies so that we can have a level of trust that we'll get those minerals when we need them. But that's how we're going to address climate change in real time, at the same time keeping energy costs as low as possible. Again, one of the things Chris Wright talks about all the time is that there's 1 billion of us that have this abundance of inexpensive energy, but there's 7 billion people out there that would like to have that. And 2 billion don't have anything at all. They're burning open hearth stoves to cook their food and to heat their housing. And the number, the World Health Organization says that there's roughly 2 million people a year that die directly from the pulmonary diseases that come from those open hearth burning. And that should be unacceptable to all of us. So we need to look at, as we transition to a cleaner energy future, and that's going to include who knows what, whether that's just wind and solar and geothermal and hydropower, or whether that's going to include some sort of carbon capture or nuclear. we have to recognize that we need more energy. The rest of the world needs energy as well. And we've got to have all of the above and continue to push the research, but also to scale use the incentives to scale the production and, whether it's grid or whether it's, getting these critical minerals out. All these things should be bipartisan. So anyway, that's the critical minerals, the grid, getting a business plan. Republicans and Democrats, we should all want to have a North Star. Here's where we're going. Here's what it's going to cost, and here are the variations, and we know we don't have all the facts, but we should be able to get to something like that on a bipartisan level.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here a little bit. You may be able to overcome that hurdle. That's a big if there with the Republicans and come up with a permitting deal or critical minerals deal.
I think we're closer than you think. But anyway, go ahead.
Great. Well, we'll be talking to you
I'm
later
sure you
about
will
that
be,
as well.
yeah.
But when you look at the idea that you may pass something, you may get something passed with your colleagues on the Hill, but the administration itself seems to be both. It seems to send such mixed signals and its willingness to really not follow the law in many cases, not follow court rulings, has to raise some questions about what is Congress doing to really implement its will as the branch of government over an executive that's seeking a lot more power to do really what it wants to do.
Well, I think Congress is and has to obey the laws and make sure that the executive branch of government obeys the laws. And the power of the purse is the most obvious place. Congress in the Constitution is designated as the sole source of actually where revenues come from and how they're to be spent. And at times the White House appears to disregard that. Congress is going to, I don't know how many thousands of lawyers are working right now in Washington, but it's a lot. And just for the record, I'm not a lawyer, 14 restaurants, I never sued anyone or got sued. We do have to have that legal remedy and make sure that the law is followed, and I think Congress will continue to do that. But I believe that I take the Trump administration at face value that they want economic growth. It's obviously slowed down a little bit right now, and they're going to be looking, I think, at ways that they can stimulate growth, and one way is through the alignment of some of these compromises, and how do you get the grid rebuilt and expanded in a way that's going to meet the transmission needs that we're going to have, and how do we make sure that we get the minerals we're going to need and that we can do some of that extraction and processing in this country and set standards for the rest of the world, while at the same time maintaining our reputation as an environmental leader among the world's countries. So those kinds of things are going to serve, I think, what the administration wants to do. So whereas they sometimes are unpredictable, I think that's fair to say, in many situations, I think around some of these bipartisan approaches to our energy system, I'm hopeful that we won't have any surprises.
When you look at permitting specifically, at the end of last year, it seemed like you were pretty close. The handful of members, a half a dozen or maybe a dozen members who were participating in those talks, seemed really close. It seemed like everyone was sort of on the same page, but you really couldn't get the Republican leadership in the House to throw its weight behind it. Do you get a sense that that's changed now? That the Republican leadership in the House seems to have plenty on its plate right now.
Yeah, well, they do have plenty on their plate, there's no question. And I think in the next couple of weeks, we're probably not going to get a lot of progress on things like permit reform. Mm-hmm. But you're right, we were very close. And those final drafts had elements that made me and most Democrats unhappy and awkward, and they weren't perfect. But in good legislation, my experience is as long as everybody's a little bit pissed off, right, you're making progress. And I think that's where we were. We were very close. And I think the places where we had contention are resolvable. It's going to take time and some conversation both in the Senate and the House. But it's so close, and it has so much material benefit to people's home districts, mm-hmm, but also to the country. And that gives me, again, I feel pretty optimistic. Sometimes when there's this much chaos, it's hard to get optimistic. But if you're not optimistic, you're never going to get what needs to be done. And I keep telling people back in Colorado, when they get, let's just say not depressed, but they get dismayed disheartened, disenchanted by all the chaos in Washington. This is not the time to back away and throw up your hands. This is the time to redouble your efforts and say, all right, I'm going to get involved. And I'm going to point out that we need these compromises and we need to work on some of these things in a bipartisan way.
Do you think that the Republicans are going to bend a little bit towards Democratic requests on the grid to make a stronger national grid, to increase those interconnections between states and regions?
I'd be a pretty poor Joe Manchin if I was going to say that Republicans are going to bend to our way. No, I think we need to bend and they need to bend. We all need to work towards a common goal. And I don't see us, getting them to make any compromises without us making compromises as well. It's got to be a two-headed effort to make sure that we do things in a way that really can be bipartisan. I mean, each congressperson has got to go back to their district in all this chaos and explain each specific vote. I mean, this is going to be a real period of transparency, and I think this is the kind of vote that people can go home to their districts and say, well, this is a tough vote, and here's the parts of it you're not going to like, and here's the parts of it you are going to like, but we are moving the ball down the field.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much for your joining us here today. That's all the time we have. Thank you, Senator, for your time and insight, and for our audience for coming out today to listen to our conversation. The final program in our first 100 Days Policy Breakfast Series will be a deep dive into the future of agriculture policy next month. Make sure to join us for more riveting conversations with some of the nation's key agricultural policy leaders on March 13th. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.